An abandoned dog jumped in front of a train to save a boy. That noble act made everyone extremely regretful for what they had done. The garden was alive with the warmth of a quiet morning sun, casting soft glows across the freshly cut grass and the low-hanging branches of the old willow. Birds chirped softly in the distance, their calls mingling with the rustling of leaves. It was Ryan's 4th birthday, a day that felt to him like a promise of something wonderful yet to come. He watched eagerly as his parents approached him, his mother Isabel carrying a small, neatly wrapped box, and his father Lucas with a knowing smile that made Ryan's heart race with excitement. "Close your eyes, Ryan," Isabel said, a soft smile lighting her face. She held the box behind her back, nodding at Lucas. Ryan, always obedient, squeezed his eyes shut, his small hands clenched in eager anticipation. "Now, open them." Lucas's voice was gentle, yet it held a thrill that matched Ryan's own. Ryan's eyes flew open, and there in Isabel's arms was a tiny ball of fur, brown and white, with soft, shining eyes that looked directly at him, full of curiosity. His mouth fell open and he gasped, unable to believe what he was seeing. "A puppy?" he whispered, barely able to contain the wonder in his voice. Lucas crouched beside him, nodding with a proud smile. "Yes, Ryan, this is Collie. He's yours now, your very own friend." Carefully, Isabel placed the puppy in Ryan's arms. The tiny creature looked up at Ryan, then reached out a small paw, as if in a friendly greeting. Ryan let out a soft laugh, cradling Collie close to his chest, feeling the puppy's heartbeat thudding against his own. The warmth of Collie's fur and the weight of him in his arms made Ryan feel like he'd just been given the whole world. "Hi, Collie," Ryan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to take care of you. We'll be best friends." As he looked up, he saw his parents watching him, their faces filled with gentle relief and affection. Isabel sighed, almost whispering to herself, "I think we made the right choice, Lucas." Lucas nodded. "Look at him. That's all the answer we need." He smiled softly, his arm around Isabel's shoulders, and they both watched as Ryan cuddled his new friend. The day unfolded with laughter and delight as Ryan and Collie became acquainted. In the backyard, Ryan ran across the grass, holding a small stick for Collie to chase. The puppy, clumsy but determined, tried to keep up, his little legs pumping as he stumbled after his new friend. Each time Collie tripped or fell, Ryan would scoop him up, laughing as he reassured the puppy, "You're doing great, Collie. You'll be as fast as lightning one day, just wait." And when afternoon turned to dusk, they all sat together under the glow of the setting sun, Isabel holding Lucas's hand as they watched their son playing with his new companion. Ryan and Collie sprawled together on the grass, the boy's arm wrapped protectively around the puppy, who had finally tired out. Later that night, as the first raindrops began to patter against the window, Isabel peeked into Ryan's room. She found him fast asleep, Collie nestled beside him on the bed, the little puppy's head resting on Ryan's chest, rising and falling with each breath. She turned to Lucas, who had come up behind her and was peering into the room with a look of quiet pride. "They already look inseparable," Isabel whispered, a hint of wonder in her voice. "I didn't expect him to bond with Collie so quickly." Lucas nodded. Animals know when they're loved. And Ryan, well, he's always had a big heart. It was just waiting for someone to fill it. He squeezed Isabel's hand reassuringly. This was the best gift we could have given him. Isabel felt a wave of relief wash over her, realizing that this tiny creature might be exactly what their family needed. A bond that would grow and strengthen, uniting them all in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. In the golden light of late afternoon, Ryan's laughter filled the garden as Collie chased him around the backyard. their footsteps kicking up bits of dry grass. Collie's soft, alert eyes followed Ryan's every movement, and his shaggy tail wagged enthusiastically. For Ryan, his four-legged friend was more than a companion. Collie was a world of comfort and joy, understanding him in ways others seemed to miss. From the kitchen window, Isabel watched her son play with Collie, her brow furrowing ever so slightly. She leaned her elbows on the counter, sighing as she watched them. The backyard, its grass dappled with patches of light and shade, bordered by a fence and scattered flower beds, had become Ryan and Collie's private realm, one that seemed increasingly separate from the rest of the world. When Lucas entered the kitchen, Isabel turned to him, a hint of unease in her voice. "Have you noticed how much time Ryan spends with Collie?" Lucas shrugged, grabbing a glass from the cabinet. "What's wrong with that? They're friends." "It's just, he's always with Collie," Isabel said, glancing back toward the yard. "He doesn't play with other kids much. Doesn't that worry you? Shouldn't he be making friends his own age?" Lucas looked out the window thoughtfully, watching his son as Collie darted ahead, letting Ryan catch up before bounding forward again. "Isabel, Collie's the best friend he could ask for. Collie is always there for him. No judgments, no conflicts." Isabel crossed her arms, feeling the familiar tug of frustration. "I know you love Collie too, but Ryan needs human connection, Lucas. He's growing up. He can't rely solely on a dog." Lucas set his glass down with a slight clink, the sound punctuating the silence that had fallen between them. "You know what I think? A dog can be more reliable than any human friend, especially for a child like Ryan," he said, his tone firm. "There's something pure about the way Collie loves him. They have a bond that goes beyond words, beyond anything I ever had at his age." "But that's exactly it," Isabel replied, her voice softening as she tried to convey her concern. "There are no words. He doesn't talk about his day with us, and he's not learning to share with other children. Don't you think that could be a problem down the road?" Their voices had grown louder, and from the yard Ryan caught snippets of their conversation. He glanced at Collie, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Collie tilted his head, as if sensing the unease in the air. Ryan bit his lip, pretending not to hear, but the once warm and familiar sounds of home were becoming strained, unfamiliar. "You're making this into a bigger issue than it is," Lucas insisted. "Let him have Collie. That dog would give his life for Ryan if it came to it. No friend from school could ever do that." "But that's not the point," Isabel's voice rose. "I just want what's best for Ryan, Lucas. I want him to feel included, to feel like he belongs with other children, not just with a dog." The tension in the room hung heavy, each word they exchanged seeming to widen the gap between them. For Isabel, her worries stretched far beyond Collie. This was about her son's future, about the small but persistent fears that sometimes kept her awake at night. Lucas sighed, softening his tone as he tried to reach a middle ground. "Isabel, we both want what's best for him. But maybe Collie is what he needs right now. He's a quiet kid. He doesn't need a room full of people to feel whole. You remember when we were young, right? We were the same way." "Maybe," Isabel replied, her arms dropping to her sides, frustration giving way to resignation. "But it's not just about us, Lucas. It's about Ryan. I don't want him to feel isolated." She paused, looking out at their son, who sat cross-legged in the grass with Collie beside him, his small hand resting on the dog's back. "I just don't want him to feel alone." Their conversation trailed off, neither wanting to press further. Isabel's concerns remained, simmering just beneath the surface, while Lucas clung to the belief that Collie's loyalty would be enough for Ryan's happiness. As the days passed, Ryan noticed the change in the atmosphere around the house. The warmth that once filled each room now felt tense, fractured. Conversations between his parents, which used to flow easily, now came with long silences and hushed tones. When Isabel and Lucas spoke, their voices were filled with an unspoken strain that Ryan couldn't quite understand, but felt deeply. At times, he'd linger in the kitchen doorway, hoping his parents would notice him, but they seemed consumed by invisible worries, lost in their own thoughts. In those moments, Collie would nudge Ryan's hand, his quiet presence a constant reminder that Ryan wasn't alone, even as he felt the chill of something shifting within his family. "Come on, Collie," Ryan would whisper, retreating to the backyard where he knew they could be alone. Here, he found solace in the gentle rustle of leaves, the warm afternoon sun, and the soft, familiar feel of Collie's fur beneath his hand. With each passing day, Ryan withdrew a little more, spending hours nestled against Collie, seeking refuge from the growing distance between his parents. And then an unexpected event came to the family. In the quiet stillness of the morning, Isabel took a slow breath, one hand resting on her abdomen as she gazed out the kitchen window, her thoughts swirling with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Lucas, half leaning on the counter with his morning coffee, caught the softness in her gaze and smiled. He had known this news for barely a day, yet already felt the shift in their household, an unspoken promise of something precious yet to come. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice a gentle murmur. Isabel turned, her face lighting up with a mixture of anticipation and lingering uncertainty. "I think so," she replied, brushing her fingertips over her stomach with a tender smile. "It feels right, you know. Maybe this is what we needed. A fresh start." Lucas nodded, moving closer to wrap his arm around her shoulders. For the past months, tension had built between them, and both sensed the strain in their relationship. Yet here, wrapped in the quiet of morning, the hope of a new child seemed to sweep the dust of old conflicts away. The days passed with an unexpected lightness in the household. Isabel's pregnancy became a beacon, a reason for each of them to set aside small grievances, to focus on the growing life within her. Ryan had never known the excitement of becoming a brother, and often sat beside Isabel, his small hand brushing over her rounded belly, as if trying to connect with his unborn sibling. Collie, too, sensed the change in the air. The loyal dog had grown accustomed to the ebb and flow of the family's moods, and now each day he padded around Isabel protectively, his watchful eyes and wagging tail a constant source of comfort. Whenever Isabel rested, Collie settled beside her, head on his paws, as if guarding her and the life she carried. When the day finally arrived, the house was filled with an electric sense of expectancy. Lucas paced the floor, his fingers tapping nervously on his phone, while Ryan fidgeted beside him, his wide eyes mirroring his father's excitement. And when they returned from the hospital, little Charlotte cradled in Isabel's arms. A serene stillness descended upon them. "She's perfect," Lucas whispered, peeking over Isabel's shoulder to gaze at his daughter's tiny, delicate face. Ryan's face glowed as he cautiously approached, his small fingers reaching out to stroke her hand, awed by the fragile warmth of her grip. "Hello, Charlotte," Ryan whispered, his voice tender with wonder. "I'm your big brother." Collie, seated nearby, observed the scene with a curious tilt of his head. He approached cautiously, his tail wagging slowly, and as he sniffed the air around the baby, he seemed to understand the preciousness of this new family member. Over the next few days, Collie grew attached to Charlotte, his gentle presence often close by her side. When she woke, he'd trot over to her crib, his tail wagging as he circled it, his nose gently nudging her tiny foot as if to reassure her of his presence. "Look at him," Lucas chuckled one morning as Collie sat beside the crib, alert and watchful. "He's already decided to be her protector." Lucas watched, a soft smile spreading across his face. He's part of the family. Maybe he feels it's his duty too. But as the days turned into weeks, Collie began to sense something different in the family's rhythms. Where once every glance and laugh had been shared with him, now all eyes were drawn to Charlotte. Isabel and Lucas, overwhelmed by the demands of their newborn, found less time for him. They barely noticed when he wagged his tail or waited patiently for someone to toss him his favorite ball. Even Ryan, his young heart brimming with new responsibilities, spent more time at school or with his little sister, his affectionate gestures toward Collie becoming less frequent. The evenings grew lonelier for Collie. No longer did he feel the warmth of a hand stroking his fur as he lay by the family's feet. He still wagged his tail when the front door opened, his eyes bright with anticipation. But when no one knelt to greet him, the light in his eyes dimmed. He would pace around Charlotte's crib, trying to capture anyone's attention. But each time they were preoccupied, their laughter and voices directed elsewhere. One evening, as the family gathered around Charlotte, Collie lay on his mat by the doorway, his head resting on his paws. His usual alert eyes were now clouded with a quiet sadness, his body unmoving as he watched them. "Collie!" Ryan called, noticing him by the door. But even the boy's voice had softened with uncertainty. The loyal dog's tail twitched, a flicker of the old spark, but he simply laid his head back down, realizing that, for now, he was alone in the periphery of their lives. As Charlotte grew older, the quiet rhythm of life in the house shifted. Collie, once the center of joyful commotion and eager attention, began to notice the gradual fading of his once beloved role. Days were filled with new sounds, new faces, and the gurgling laughter of the little one, Charlotte. And while Collie's tail would wag in unchanging devotion, he could feel the soft hush of neglect settling like a gentle fog in the home he had known as his. One evening, as the family returned from their daily bustle, Collie sprang to his feet. His ears perked up, his tail thumped rhythmically against the doorframe, a steady beat of anticipation. The door swung open, and Collie's eyes gleamed with an old spark as he watched Ryan, Lucas, and Isabel file into the house, hands full with bags, jackets, and Charlotte bundled in her father's arms. Collie's gaze moved from one to the other, waiting for a familiar pat on the head or a warm word. But the family passed by in a flurry, barely a glance in his direction. Collie's tail slowed, then stopped. He let out a soft whine, almost as if to say, "I'm here. I missed you." But the room was already empty, filled with echoes of footsteps and the rustle of everyday chores. Collie padded quietly after them, watching as they settled into their evening routines, busy with things that no longer seemed to include him. In the early days, Collie would still try. Whenever Ryan was outside, Collie would leap playfully over the low fence in the backyard, darting between trees, hoping for that familiar cheer of encouragement or the delighted claps that had once filled the garden. But now, his jumps landed in silence, his antics unnoticed. Ryan's attention drifted between Charlotte and his schoolwork, new friends and toys that held more novelty than Collie's old games. Collie could sense the distance widening between them, like a quiet river that had begun to flow between himself and his beloved friend. "Maybe I need to try harder," Collie's eyes seemed to say, brimming with quiet determination. So each evening, when he heard the sound of a key in the lock, he was there, tail wagging, ears perked, eyes bright with hope. Yet each evening, the family would step past him, caught in conversations about Charlotte's latest discovery, about work or plans for the week. Collie's eyes, once brimming with unbounded joy, began to dull, the spark fading as surely as the days that came and went. One morning, Lucas noticed Collie lying by the window, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the garden. His usually shiny coat looked dull, his once robust form had grown thinner. Lucas paused, noting his quiet demeanor and the slight downturn of his ears. "Collie, what's wrong, boy?" Lucas asked, reaching out to ruffle his fur. For a moment his tail gave a tentative wag, a brief flicker of happiness. But as Lucas turned his attention back to Charlotte, Collie let his head sink down on his paws, his gaze growing distant once more. It was as if he'd sensed something intangible slipping away, a thread connecting him to his family, loosening bit by bit. As days passed, Collie's appetite waned. His bowl, once polished clean within minutes, now often remained half full, untouched. He would sit alone by the kitchen door, eyes clouded, posture slouched, as though a weight bore down on his small frame. The garden, once his playground, no longer enticed him. His usual spirited barks grew rare, replaced by a quiet resignation as he lay for hours on the cool tiles of the kitchen floor, a silent witness to the family's life passing him by. Ryan noticed, if only faintly, that Collie seemed quieter, less full of life. "Collie," he called one afternoon, bending down beside the dog. For a moment Collie looked up, his eyes brightening with a fragile hope. But then the sounds of Charlotte babbling in the next room drew Ryan's attention away. "Coming, Charlotte," Ryan said, his voice filled with a new excitement as he hurried off, leaving Collie alone once more. Collie's gaze followed him to the doorway, the hope flickering and dimming. He shifted, curling his body tighter, laying his head down on his paws with a soft, weary sigh. In that quiet house that he had once filled with joy, Collie began to drift into an unspoken solitude, feeling more like a shadow than a beloved companion. In the days that followed, Collie remained there, a steadfast presence that had slowly grown invisible to those he cherished. Only the walls bore witness to his quiet, undying loyalty. And though he waited each day, his spirit dimmed, like a candle burning itself out in the hope that someone, anyone, would still remember to light it. On a cool morning, bright with promise, the family packed their picnic baskets, each one adding something of their own. Isabel tucked a soft blanket into the back seat, while Lucas loaded sandwiches and juice. Ryan, in his quiet excitement, carefully placed Charlotte's favorite toy next to her car seat, ensuring that everything was perfect for their outing. Collie, tail wagging and eyes alight, watched eagerly as the preparations unfolded. For him, every trip with the family was an adventure, a rare chance to bask in their love and to stay close to his boy, Ryan. The drive began happily enough, with Lucas at the wheel, a relaxed smile on his face, while Isabel's laughter floated from the front seat. Ryan leaned over Charlotte's carrier, amusing her with soft coos, while Collie lay peacefully at his feet. The open road stretched out before them, and for a while everything felt complete. But as the sun began to dip, casting long shadows over the road, a sense of unease crept into the car. Lucas, misjudging the unfamiliar roads, had taken a wrong turn somewhere back. A quiet tension settled over the car, slowly filling the silence. Isabel frowned, the worry lines around her eyes deepening as she glanced at the map, unsure of their location. "We should have turned back there," she said, her voice quiet but tense. Lucas tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his expression resolute. It's just another route, Isabel. We'll get there eventually. Lucas, this isn't the time to experiment with scenic routes. The kids are tired. And so am I, she insisted, the edge in her voice sharper now. I'm doing my best here, he replied, irritation seeping into his tone. The argument unfolded quietly but insistently, the way many of their disagreements did. Each knew the other too well, so they held back, but the simmering tension was unmistakable. As they approached a gas station, Lucas pulled over to refuel. Isabel stayed in the car, silently fuming, while Ryan leaned over Charlotte, adjusting her blanket. Collie jumped out of the car, sniffing the ground eagerly, delighted by the new smells. His loyal eyes glanced back at the family as he wandered around, sniffing the pavement, briefly forgotten in the quiet chaos. Minutes later, they were back on the road, the argument lingering in the air. Ryan glanced down, noticing the empty space by his feet. "Mom," he whispered, a sudden pang of fear rising in his chest. "Where's Collie?" The question hit Isabel like a cold shock. She turned to Lucas, her face pale. "Lucas... Collie." Lucas's face twisted in horror as he realized the truth. "I didn't see him. He must still be back at the gas station." Without hesitation, Lucas turned the car around. The urgency in the air, thick and overwhelming. The world outside seemed to blur as they retraced their route, every minute dragging out painfully. When they reached the gas station, they searched desperately, calling out his name in every direction, but Collie was nowhere to be found. Ryan's face crumpled as he looked into the empty spaces around them. He wouldn't leave us. He must be here, somewhere. His voice cracked, a tremor of panic threading through his words. After hours of searching, Lucas, voice hoarse from calling, finally turned to his family, shoulders heavy with the weight of regret. "We need help," he whispered, swallowing the grief building in his throat. In the days that followed, they called search teams and scoured the town, asking neighbors, leaving notes, hoping that someone somewhere had seen Collie. Each day without him passed like a long shadow over the family. The house felt colder, empty in a way it hadn't before. Ryan withdrew, his voice quieter than ever, his heart weighed down with guilt. He replayed the morning's joy in his mind, Collie's happy face as they packed the car, the warm look in his eyes as he lay beside him. Now, those memories felt distant, as if Collie had been nothing more than a passing dream. Ryan clung to the guilt, each memory of Collie's gentle face making the emptiness in his heart ache more sharply. One evening, Ryan sat in his room, the dim light casting shadows on the walls. His mother came in, her face drawn with worry. "Ryan," she whispered, sitting down beside him. "I know you miss him, honey. We all do." Ryan's voice was soft, barely audible. "It's my fault, Mom. I should have checked." Isabel's eyes filled with tears as she wrapped an arm around him. "It's no one's fault, Ryan. We all loved Collie, and we're going to keep looking for him together." Lucas stood in the hallway, listening. His heart, too, was heavy with remorse. The loss of Collie felt like the breaking of a thread that had held them together. The argument that had seemed so trivial now loomed as a painful reminder of what they'd overlooked. And, in that silence, as the family sat together, each holding on to their regrets, they silently vowed to be more present, more aware. For Collie. For each other. For the moments that might slip away forever if they weren't careful. The late afternoon light cast long shadows along the railway tracks, painting the scene with a quiet, haunting beauty. Ryan walked slowly, his small feet brushing against the gravel path that bordered the rails, eyes fixed ahead, as if searching for a memory he couldn't quite grasp. This stretch of track held fragments of his childhood. He and Collie used to wander here, exploring every rock and thorn, delighting in the rustling trees. Now his heart felt heavy with the realization of all that had changed since then. As he walked, Ryan noticed a familiar shape a short distance down the track. He blinked, hardly daring to believe his eyes. There, standing alone on the rails, was Collie. A little thinner, his coat dusted with dirt, but unmistakably Collie. Ryan's heart surged with relief and joy as he called out, "Collie!" His voice trembled, carrying a mixture of hope and longing. Collie's head lifted, his eyes lighting up at the sound of Ryan's voice. The faithful dog wagged his tail, but there was a weariness in his posture. Still, he began to limp towards the boy with all the strength he could summon, drawn by an unbreakable bond. "Collie!" Ryan cried again, rushing toward his friend, feet pounding over the rough stones. He could barely contain his excitement. His only thought was to close the distance between them. "I'm so sorry, boy. I missed you so much." The words spilled out of him, unguarded and raw, but in his joy Ryan failed to notice the distant rumble approaching from the bend in the tracks. Collie, however, sensed it. His ears pricked, his body tensed, and his gaze shot past Ryan to the tracks beyond, where the glint of a train's headlights pierced the encroaching dusk. The train was coming, fast, and Ryan was standing directly in its path. "Ryan!" It was as if Collie could speak, his body screaming the urgency as he leaped forward, muscles coiled and taut with the strength he had left. In one swift motion, Collie lunged forward, colliding with Ryan and shoving him off the rails with a force that sent the boy sprawling onto the gravel. Safe. Ryan barely had time to comprehend what had happened before he turned back to see Collie, mere feet from the train, his brown eyes filled with an unmistakable loyalty and a hint of finality. Time seemed to freeze as the train roared past, a blinding flash of metal and sound. And then, silence. "Collie!" Ryan scrambled to his feet, heart pounding as he spotted Collie's body lying at the edge of the tracks, motionless. Tears blurred his vision as he stumbled over to his friend and dropped to his knees beside him. "Collie, no, please." His voice was broken, his small hands trembling as they moved to cradle Collie's head. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't know." Ryan's words fell in a torrent of regret, each one spilling into the emptiness around them. Collie's breath was shallow, his sides rising and falling weakly as he gazed up at Ryan. His tail gave the faintest of wags, as if to tell Ryan he understood, that he forgave him, that he'd always be there, even in this final moment. Just then Ryan heard the hurried footsteps of his parents, their voices filled with desperation. "Ryan, where are you?" Isabel and Lucas arrived, their faces contorted with horror as they saw Ryan holding Collie, the scene striking them like a blow. "Oh my God," Isabel whispered, covering her mouth. "Collie." Lucas knelt down, his eyes filled with a pain he hadn't known he could feel. Gently he placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Ryan, he saved you," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion. Ryan nodded, unable to speak as he buried his face into Collie's fur, clutching him as though he could somehow keep him here, somehow take back all the times he'd ignored his friend, all the moments he'd let slip by. I didn't know how much I loved him," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. "He was always there, and I didn't even say goodbye." Isabel knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face as she reached out to stroke Collie's head, her hand shaking. "We were all too blind to see, Ryan," she murmured, her own guilt heavy. "But he loved us, anyway." In that moment, the family sat in silent communion, united by a grief that felt both unbearable and strangely healing. Collie, with his last act of loyalty, had given them something irreplaceable, a reminder of love's quiet, unwavering strength. 6 months had passed since the accident on the railway, yet for Ryan the memory was still fresh, as though etched into yesterday. The day had dawned bright and serene, a soft autumn breeze stirring through the trees and casting playful shadows across the backyard. Ryan sat on the grass behind the house, his face alight with a joy that had been absent for too long. By his side, Collie, now with a small, sturdy wheelchair strapped around his hind legs, bounced eagerly, his tail a blur of happiness. "Come on, Collie, bet you can't catch me," Ryan challenged, his laughter ringing out. He dashed forward, glancing over his shoulder as Collie wheeled after him with an energy that seemed untouched by the accident. The contraption that supported Collie's weakened back legs was something he'd grown used to, adapting with remarkable resilience. He chased after Ryan, his gaze never wavering, as though the connection between them were as visible as the sunlight weaving between the branches. From a distance, Isabel and Lucas stood hand in hand, watching their son and Collie with silent pride. Lucas felt a warmth fill his chest, a blend of relief, gratitude, and an appreciation for the moment's simplicity. It had taken time to reach this place of quiet happiness, a place where they could watch their children, both the boy and his dog, as they were meant to be, safe and whole again. "Look at them," Isabel whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "You can see how much Ryan's changed, can't you?" Lucas nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "He's different now," he murmured. "Stronger, maybe. And he understands things I didn't think he'd need to learn yet. Collie taught him that." Isabel's gaze softened as she watched Ryan bend down, wrapping his arms around Collie and whispering something to him with a gentleness that filled her with both pride and a lingering ache. She knew how deeply her son had grieved Collie's absence, the terrible guilt he'd carried for those days the dog had gone missing. But something had shifted after the accident. In those long weeks of caring for Collie, of nursing his companion back to health, Ryan had discovered a new kind of strength, a resilience that went beyond his years. "Sometimes I feel like we've learned as much as Ryan has," Isabel said softly. "It's easy to take everything for granted until life forces you to slow down and see what you've been ignoring all along." Lucas tightened his hold around her, nodding. "Collie's taught all of us. He's more than just a dog now, you know." Isabel smiled, wiping a stray tear that had slipped down her cheek. She hadn't wanted to cry. These tears were not of sadness, but of relief. "I know," she replied. "I see it every day in Ryan, in the way he looks at Collie. He understands what love really means now." As they spoke, Ryan had led Collie to a small patch of dandelions that sprouted at the edge of the lawn. He knelt beside the dog, carefully brushing back Collie's fur and whispering as though sharing secrets. Collie watched him with a look that seemed nearly human, his eyes filled with that same undying loyalty. And for Ryan, each moment with Collie felt like a gift, a second chance he would never waste. "Thank you, Collie," he murmured, his voice barely audible to his parents. "For everything. And for saving me." Collie's response was to nuzzle closer to Ryan, his soft, warm fur pressed against the boy's cheek. His tail wagged gently, as though he too understood the depth of Ryan's words. Lucas glanced at Isabel, his face a mixture of awe and gratitude. "We owe Collie more than we can ever repay. He saved our boy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And he's brought us all together in a way I don't think anything else could have." Isabel squeezed Lucas's hand, her gaze never leaving her son and his dog. "I know," she replied. "It's a reminder, isn't it? To appreciate the ones we love. And to be present." Ryan, unaware of his parents' quiet observation, leaned back and laughed as Collie attempted another energetic chase, his wheels kicking up little sprays of earth. They played and laughed until the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the yard, until shadows grew long and the air turned cool. As Isabel and Lucas watched their son play, they shared a quiet, grateful smile. For a moment, all the pain, all the mistakes and heartaches that had woven through their lives felt softened, forgiven by the sight of this joyful, resilient friendship. They understood, deeply and clearly, that Collie had become far more than a pet. He was the bond that had drawn their family back together, teaching them a precious lesson they would carry forever. Isabel looked up at Lucas. "Let's not forget this, okay? Let's never let life get so busy that we miss these moments again." Lucas nodded, his eyes still on their son. "Never again," he agreed. In the fading light, Ryan and Collie played on, their laughter mingling with the soft murmur of the trees, a harmonious reminder of the love, loyalty, and quiet strength that had brought them all to this place. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Isabel and Lucas knew that their family was, finally, whole. And that's the story of Ryan and Collie, a tale of friendship, loyalty, and the incredible power of love. It's amazing how sometimes the quietest members of our family, like Collie, can teach us the most valuable lessons and even bring us closer together. Thank you so much for joining us in this heartfelt journey. If you've ever had a pet who's left a mark on your life, we'd love to hear about it. Share your stories in the comments below. Let's celebrate those loyal, loving friends who, like Collie, remind us what family truly means. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. Until next time, take care and cherish every moment with those you love.